I said talk to me, damn it, or else I'm gonna throw you in the fire!
You stupid bitch, you filthy...
Flyover State of Fear. Everyone, welcome to Flyover State of Fear, and I have a really special guest this week. I have Lon Harris of Screen Junkies fame, Schmoedown, the Binge Boys, kind of you name it, honest trailer writer, man of many trades.
Well, not you name it. There's plenty of things I don't. There's plenty of things like the WWE. I have no involvement whatsoever.
Sure. Some great Nick Cage interviews from back in the day that you sent me.
That's true. That's true.
All good. Thanks, Lon. Thank you for being here. And
my pleasure.
Lon and I have followed each other on Twitter for quite some time, and there's always a lot of horror talk and just all sorts of I would just say general movie talk always going on, replying to things. So thanks for joining. And Lon today chose Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1978. But before we even get into any of that, how's it going? How you been? How's everything?
Not too bad. Can't complain.
Yeah.
So
this is our podcast. What is I like to begin every episode just kind of with my guests, getting to know them and your horror origin story, if you have one.
Sure. I did not. As a kid, I loved comedies. Like that was all. That was all I was into as a young person. Probably for the first 10 or 12 years of my life, I really just wanted to watch funny things. Like there would be occasionally I would get into something else as long as it had a funny element to it. So
sure.
Star Wars I thought was cool because it was still pretty funny. I could get into it because the droids were funny and it's humor. It was light and humorous in that way. I was just not into there were a lot of kids who got right away into fantasy and sci-fi and action and horror, and those kind of genres did not interest me as a young person because I just
I can relate.
Stuff. So that was also kind of my entry into horror. Once I was in my preteens and early teens, I would start to see things like Child's Play or even Scream, even a few years after that, or Evil Dead 2, and those Army of Darkness, and those kinds of movies. I'm even wearing the shirt Big Trouble in Little China, stuff like that. That's what was, and even Beetlejuice, even stuff like that. So comedies with horror or supernatural elements, or horror movies that were kind of jokey and funny. That was really my entry into the genre. And then that led me to get interested in, by the time I was in my teens, slasher movies and, more conventional horror type fare.
Sure. No, I definitely can relate to that of the comedies. I'd say I definitely, because I always liked Halloween, the holiday and that around it. So he's
right.
I always put a foot into horror and scary, but I was too afraid to get there until probably about 12 or so.
I liked ghost shit.
Yes.
It wasn't like I was scared. It wasn't ever I was afraid of horror movies.
Yeah.
It was just I didn't care about stuff that wasn't funny. My dad always loved spy stuff and action stuff and tried to get me into that as a kid. But James Bond just didn't do anything. I love it now, but at age 8 or 10, I didn't think that was cool. I just didn't care because he wasn't. I mean, he's quipping, but not in a way I thought as a kid was funny. I thought Martin Short was really funny. I think that kind of
the jerk. And my mom was very
Rick Moranis and John Candy and Bill Murray and I loved those guys and wanted to see everything they did, and Chevy Chase, and I was way more into that than I was anything dramatic or scary or whatever.
Yeah, my mom pushed all sorts of slapstick on us. Anything, I was 90s kid, so it had anything Martin Lawrence, Eddie Murphy, Mike Myers, you name it. So it was all comedy, and growing up, some of the palettes changed a little bit, and be like, yeah, that was funny in 1996. But
yeah, well, my brother and I were also a weird case because neither of my parents were into movies. Like, I'm not even sure how it happened. Like, I got very into movies at a very young age. I'm not like I discovered that I liked them as a kid independently because my mom really could give a shit less, even to this day. Like, she likes TV and but she was always a reader. And my dad exclusively liked Bond movies and like action. But like that, but in a casual way.
Yeah, my dad
Not in a like,
that.
yeah, but not in an obsessive. Like, he didn't have a movie collection. It was just like, oh, Moonraker's on. Like, it was just that. And so I don't know where it came from for me, but then I got my brother into it. So we grew up obsessed about movies, but it was all self-taught. Like, it was just,
that's great.
I had to figure out what I liked and get into it because I didn't have a parent that was like pushing. Like, my dad wished I had gotten into like models. Like, he wanted us to build models, and I just didn't give a shit.
No, I get that also, but yeah, that's so I guess your origin story would be finding the humor in the horror and then spark.
I mean, the specific story was I went to a sleepover when I was probably, I guess it would be 13 or 14, and the girl whose house we were at, one of her siblings or whatever had rented the first Child's Play. So we threw it on. And that was not a movie that I would have ever thought to rent for myself, even though I guess the premise is sort of humorous, but it was just not something that would have interested me. And I thought it was really fun watching it with a group of people that were all kind of reacting. I was like, oh, I should start checking out other kinds of movies like this because I also think this is fun, even though it's not like directly Monty Python, like anything for a laugh gag fest.
And that first Child's Play is like, played a lot more straight too, and they're hiding it and Chucky.
Right.
No one's like, Chucky's
it's not Seed of Chucky where it's winking at you the whole time. I mean, it's goofy, but in a way that is still like, it's still trying to be scary.
Yeah, I mean, it's yes. I'll just
because I'd seen like Beetlejuice, and that has it's in the world of horror, but it's funny. It's not trying to be scary at all, even when it's gross or like there's effects or whatever.
But Beetlejuice would be like that camp for me, where it's like, this is fun. Reminds me of going out trick or treating,
right?
Compared to.
And yeah, I like that. Like, I liked Ernest Scared Stupid, but I would never have thought to just watch like Halloween.
Sure, yeah, exactly the same type of palette there at that time, because I remember being scared of, and I don't know the age of it, being scared of. You mentioned Beetlejuice, not being scared of Beetlejuice, liking Beetlejuice, being scared of Edward Scissorhands because of the ending where they chase him, and it's very dark,
right?
It's
that's an interesting thing too. Like my brother always, like, there would be stuff that was weird or spooky movies that would scare him. Like, I remember Wizard of Oz, the flying monkeys used to freak him out as a kid. And I always kind of had this thing of like, I knew it was a movie. I was never like, movies weren't the thing that kept me up night that I would be afraid of. It was like earthquakes. Like, I was a nervous kid. I was scared of stuff, but not anything from movies. So you would have thought I would have gotten into horror movies earlier. I just didn't. They weren't goofy. Like, I just wanted to laugh, and I thought I like that goofy, like, even Disney stuff. Like, I wasn't really into Disney cartoons as a kid because it wasn't broad and funny. Like, I liked stuff that was like Blazing Saddles.
Sure. Well, who doesn't?
Not even that I was really appreciating Blazing Saddles as a kid. I just thought it was funny.
No, I was the little kid who watched the Jerk and Dumb and Dumber and thought like they're my favorites, and then or like Austin Powers. Well, that was really popular.
Yeah. And then, I was already in high school for that stuff. So it's a little age difference.
We're the 92, so we're a little bit of age gap.
Yeah, that was my freshman year in high school. Was 92.
All good. So why why Invasion of the Body Snatchers? Before we kind of start breaking it down and just having a
I've been thinking about this movie a lot. I've been meaning to rewatch it. I've always been a fan. I really like this movie. I feel like it's got that. It's like 1 foot in horror and then 1 foot in like 70s paranoia thriller. And I like both of those genres. So the marriage of them, it really appeals to me.
This was a first watch for me.
Oh, interesting. But I also feel like, I don't know, there's something that feels sort of relevant and modern about this. I like the idea of being so suddenly alienated from the world around you and isolated, and that feeling of, I can't quite put my finger on it, but there's something wrong, and there's something wrong with everybody else, and there's an evil wind out there, like that
you don't know.
The midsection of the movie, because obviously, eventually, all hell breaks loose, and it's obvious that there's something horrible happening. But there's this whole midsection of the movie where people are trying to convince them that they're crazy and that it's not. And it really does kind of mirror, I think, a lot of how we feel, how it feels to be in America in 2021.
Oh, there's a great parallel here and to the modern day, but. Even you say about the paranoia, and I always kind of say the movies that everyone's in on the joke except for you, the paranoia thing. So like one of my favorite horror movies, and what I still find scary for that reason, is like Rosemary's Baby. Right, these movies are about 10 years apart, but it's the same version of paranoia. And me watching this first time, that's what I found, and you picking it right now in 2021, it's like the same thing. It's like, what you could be turned to this pod person and you might have not been there yesterday. I feel like that's comparable, like all this vax shit.
Yeah, and a lot of
shit. I should,
right, and a lot of horror and sci-fi plays with like Cassandra syndrome, I guess they call it, because like Cassandra in Greek mythology, she could see the future, but nobody believed her prophecies. Like that was her curse, was she could tell what was going to happen, but it was that horror of knowing what's going to happen, but you can't prevent it because you're not believed. And I think that feedback loop, it plays into a lot of horror and science fiction because it's very real. It's very relatable. I think we all have that. Like climate change, I think, gives a lot of people that feeling of like, how we all know this is in the newspaper that this is happening. How can we not organize to stop it? But we can't. And it's been going on and on and on. And so like I think of like 12 Monkeys really, really sort of speaks to that, where it's like Bruce Willis is cursed with this knowledge of what's going to happen, but he can't change anything. He's just there to observe. And I feel like this also has that very palpably of like, they figure out early on, like Brooke Adams and Donald Sutherland, like know what's happening. And if anybody would just listen to them, they could clear out these pods and they could do something about it. But
absolutely,
but everybody's immediately jumps into the Leonard Nimoy, like, no, listen, you're stressed. You need to go home and rest.
Just chill out, like take a sleep. Right. And being in like San Francisco in the 70s and sort of a counterculture place, it's a perfect setting for this story to spark. Now, and the story itself, though, is, I think, from the novel and then the one in the 50s, I did a lot of reading of it, just about, and it's the same thing, like, right, the allegory of either the novel or the the movie is basically about the communism scare, right? And that was the parallel there, and then and then in the late 70s, you're coming out of Vietnam and you're going into a new kind of political, commentary. In the
70s, you had all of those movies in this era. Parallax View and All the President's Men and all of these movies about individuals that are sort of coming up against these global conspiracies and these unthinkably broad, intractable problems. And I mean, you can see how that would come out of, this era where after the 60s and the counterculture and all the optimism of that era had crested, and then you have Watergate and Vietnam, and everything is just crushed. All of
I
those
mean, look at the
youthful,
movies of 1978.
yeah, all of that youthful idealism is just crushed, and it did leave people feeling like, well, these problems, we've identified the problems, but they're totally intractable. They're hopeless. We can't solve them. The powerful just keep getting more powerful, and we keep getting left behind. And so, yeah, I think that whole era, produced all of these movies that are about being pursued by an unseen foe that you can't escape, and you're trapped in this unbelievably complex web that you can't untangle. And I think this plays really neatly to that. And that also feels very relevant for us today. I feel like it's like we're seeing a resurgence of those kinds of movies, because once again, we're left feeling like none of these problems are immediately fixable. We can't see our way through the chaos.
Definitely. Like Philip Kaufman. I read today from 2018, he did an interview.
Yeah, I saw that he talked about.
Yeah, he talked.
I had come up with this connection myself before I read Philip Kaufman making the exact same connection. But he's a very smart guy. Come on. He
wrote Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean,
he's a very, very smart guy. I'm not going to outthink Kaufman.
No, I watched this last night, so today it was like just reading what I could just to talk. And I was like, oh, yeah, you were talking about this. Well, you said you made the connection, but you were talking about this in 2018, just about like Trumpism in here and
sure,
all of that. And
it's not, I mean, it is a direct, like, I think that's what makes this such a, because even if you don't know, even if you've never seen this film, even if you've never read the book, I think it was like a serialized, like a novella or whatever. But even if you've never read the original Body Snatchers, you've seen either movie, you know what this idea is. The idea of being replaced by a pod person, the idea of a body snatcher, like it's universal. And I think because it's relatable, it's one of those horror premises that just touches on something primal that we've all felt. This idea that there's something just not right with the other people out there. There's something that's changed and everything's darker now. Well, we can't put our finger on it.
So just to get in the movie itself, one of my favorite moments of watching the movie, though, talking to that, is very much in the beginning when he goes to the dry cleaner, and the woman who takes his coffee stained shirt is like, you think nothing of it because she says, "Oh, this isn't going to come out." Normal conversation. Right. And then
she's a little gruff, but you're like, some people are gruff, like some people are just not very friendly.
And then, you move on and the guy's like, something's wrong with my wife. And at that point in the movie, like, nothing's askew, right? And it's still played very joking. What I love, like, I would really, really like how this movie is structured and filmed, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff. But like, even starting it off with like Donald Sutherland's job being a health inspector, that's really neat. Just like, it's a weird job to have. And
I feel like I was thinking about that. I feel like because there's an element of he's like the motor. Like everyone else in the story is just kind of like confused and I don't know what to do. We've got this information, but we're not sure how to move forward. He's the driving force that's like, no, we can beat this. We're gonna survive. We're gonna figure this out. And I think making him a health inspector, it makes it like, yeah, he's the process guy. He's the like, we have to do things. We have a plan, and this is how you do it, and this is the 18 points that we have to hit, and like, it does kind of make an odd sort of. This is the only movie other than the one where Larry the Cable Guy specifically plays a health inspector, where the lead character is a health inspector.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
I can't think of another one.
I can't think of another one, but it's been in my mind since the minute I watched this. There's so many weirdly oddities of this and Halloween 3. I know Halloween 3 comes after, but like Donald Sutherland is just like Tom Atkins. I mean, not an alcoholic sex maniac, but there's just like, I don't know, I couldn't get that movie out of my mind, which will be a future episode of the show.
Of course.
But anyway, that was like, maybe it was probably the trench coat. But
I mean, it's like today you would not have a guy that age,
No, I
that
love
kind of demeanor centering this movie. You'd have younger hero or more proactive, or in some way they'd be more heroic than this sort of like middle-aged guy who's just kind of like trying to figure it out and has a crush on the lady he works with. And
that's one of the things, though, I really like about this story is they don't really have a love story there. He has a crush on her clearly, but at the end, I felt their love was more of like, I don't know, like a mutual respect for one another. Like that kiss wasn't a romantic kiss.
I mean, I think that the movie kind of acknowledges this idea that he's kind of always liked her. She's married. This was never a real. They were not in their minds ever going to get together. It was like a flirty. Nice, it was like a flirty work husband wife thing at best, or maybe that was what it was in his mind. And to her, she was just this guy she worked with. But then she needs him, and I like that the movie acknowledges that. And like that it maybe means different things to the two of them, and it's not this conventional like they fall into bed together. Yeah. I think that also it brings to mind, like, I think my favorite thing that Kaufman does here is that this movie isn't from really any one character's perspective. Like, it opens and it's from a like omniscient third party perspective, because we actually open on an alien world and watch these beings be born and drift on the solar winds to Earth and come down in the rain. We see their whole life cycle before we meet a human. So it's almost like the aliens are the main character. But
yeah, that's a good point of that.
But then we meet Brooke Adams, and it seems like she's going to be the main character. But then she brings the problem to Donald Sutherland, and it seems like he's going to be the main character. And there's even a moment where it sort of seems like it might jump to Jeff Goldblum and Veronica Cartwright, and then consider that she gets the ending beat. The last beat is not from any of our heroes' perspective. It's from Veronica Cartwright's perspective.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's like, you're like, holy shit, the one woman we kind of pushed in the corner as a character shows up at the end, and she's like, I've been fucking around this whole time.
Yeah.
I figured it out.
She figured out, she's the only one that really has mastered the secret of, if you just don't act emotional at all, you can like blend in.
Yeah.
And they don't know.
That's a great point, because you're right, it does really jump around.
It doesn't. I mean, in a conventional storytelling way, it really works well because you don't know who's a pod person. Like, if you had a hero, like if it was all Donald Sutherland's story, beginning to end, we would be fairly confident he's not a pod person because we've been following them the whole time. The story wouldn't make sense otherwise. But the fact that we're jumping. The fact that we're jumping around, it keeps you on your toes. Like now we're following Brooke Adams, so I'm pretty sure she's not a pod person, but I don't know about anybody else. And like, oh, now we've jumped to Donald Sutherland, so maybe she's a pod person now. And like, you can't ever kind of get your bearings.
I think that's the one, because I think this movie, from first time watch and knowing about it, right? Like in this and that, it holds up very well. I'd say that's the only thing is like, I guess maybe seeing too many movies or whatever, is the ending structure of with like Donald Sutherland, and spoiler guys, he's a pop person. At the end is that full scene throwing out him reacting. It's like, all right, maybe I just knew he was, but if that was cut a little differently and played a little differently, it'd be like it would play 10 out of 10 times, I think, any watch.
I mean, it's hard to say now because that shot is very iconic, of him.
That shot
so we all kind of know now, even if you haven't seen the movie, that's coming. Yeah.
That shot
so I don't know how that would play in isolation.
I got to show it to my wife. She's never seen any of it, and we'll see if she doesn't like horror.
Yeah, we'll see if she sees it coming, because I think they play that scene pretty interesting. Like they leave it ambiguous where.
Yeah.
You could read his reactions as he's just trying not to show emotion.
It's as iconic as the ending of Sleepaway Camp. Like, You know,
right? But you could show an image of this one. I mean,
yes, this one might be the thumbnail. Oh no, I do. I did really love this movie.
Nudity.
But yeah, I was so intrigued though of just like the camera choices they make, of just the angling of certain shots and structures of the movies. It was very 70s of the slow zooms in, but it all worked really well. And the score plays such a heavy hand at some points, but then there's nothing. I mean, it's a really well crafted movie.
Yeah, it's interesting to contrast to some of the other Paranoia thrillers too, because like Parallax View, like you get a lot of these like they're from a long way away, and like our characters in like the distance, and it's almost like like the conversation makes it very explicit. Coppola's conversation, where it's like we're doing surveillance on the movie, like we're watching the characters through, and so they don't quite do that in this movie. It's a little bit more of like the personal story we're following, but it's definitely a movie that's aware of watching and being watched. Like a lot of the horror of the whole scenario comes from they know that the aliens are sort of scrutinizing them. And if you do something that gives away that you're a human, immediately it's like 5 stars in GTA. Like they're all on you and chasing you around the city with their noises.
It becomes a zombie movie at the end of the movie.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so you've got to kind of keep that equilibrium so they don't, you're going undetected. So yeah, a lot of the camera stuff I think really deliberately evokes that in ways that's creepy. Like the camera's watching them from behind a bush or from over a ledge, or like they're aware of being watched even though they're not aware of being in a movie.
Now there's that, and then there's also of the time, because I think they hold up tremendously, is the special effects. They look great. I mean,
yeah, it's that era of
the stop motion.
Everything was being built. There it wasn't.
It looks so good.
It was everything's practical. Everything's prosthetics or they just models, or they're fabricating real stuff, and you get that there is a tactile, textural, your eye and your brain are savvy enough to recognize. And look, there's amazing computer animation and effects work. Like, I'm not knocking it. Like, movies are incredible today, and the stuff they can do that these artists can pull off is amazing, and I fucking salute you all, and it's great. But there is something to be said for, I think your brain intuitively knows, this is something that was drawn or that was designed on a computer, and this is something that, even if it's not a real alien, it's just like a bag of goo and plastic, it looks real. It really exists. The actor is interacting with it.
This walked so the thing could run in a few years.
Yes, for sure. You can tell that, and a lot of it's got a Cronenbergian sort of vibe to it.
But you mentioned the realness of things. Like I think my favorite special effects scene. I mean, the dog head is it's like charming now, more so than anything. But is Elizabeth's just face kind of pop, and the disappearance of her and emerging out from the cornfield is so. I think it's told at such the right moment and showed just enough where it's disturbing, but then enough where this nude woman's walking out, but you're completely creeped out of that scene, and he's running away, and it all just works. And that special effects of her disappearing, you see a little bit of the puppetry.
But it's also a great reveal, because one thing that we've eventually the movie kind of shows you step by step, here's how pod people take over real people.
it takes a long time to get there, but it pays off
you're learning about it step by step in phases throughout the movie. And so that's a great moment because it's not only a cool look at one of the cool showcase effects, but it's when you learn, well, here's what happens. Like this body that they had disintegrates, and then the new pod body is born, you know.
What's interesting about that too, I guess, is more about the movie and not so much about the practical effects, is like the ideology I can't talk sometimes. Ideology about how they work, right? Like if you get the person away from their like symbiotic growth pod person, that pod person could be stopped, right? We see that with Jeff Goldblum and Donald Sutherland. I mean, talking another special.
The original person has to remain asleep throughout. If they wake up too early, the process shuts down.
It's really neat. I will say, on the face smash. I do have a soft spot for 70s blood. You know, it's always it's a little more red.
Yeah, in the 60s they had this very bright, vibrant red, and it's syrupy in the 60s. And the 70s, it got better where the consistency looks a lot better, more realistic. It's still too vivid, and like arterial spray never quite looks right. But
it's great that, like, you know,
I say looks right. Like I don't know what it would really.
I don't know what it looks like.
I'm guessing. All of these things are what I imagine these things would look like.
Well,
I don't know.
I guess maybe like more this one when I see it right of the year it comes out and everything, like aware of like, because I know the story of the Taxi Driver, right? Like Scorsese has to film the ending fight scene a few times, or not fight scene, the ending shootout with the blood several times to just get a rated R rating. Like he had to really I think it was like satirize it and like go back. So whenever I watch it, I kind of think of, okay, they had to do this for this. That had to have been the same standard they applied for this. And it's really funny to see, you know, this being a PG. I know, because like I feel like what it qualified for R at that point, because there's not much like cursing or anything, but it's bloody. There's nudity. You know, in 1978, what was your rating system like?
Yeah, I mean, it's just that it's troubling. Like, I think that if you actually think about it in terms of violence, especially violence against humans, there really isn't that much on-screen violence. I mean, at least not in a graphic sort of way. And a lot of the violence is being done to, you know, pod people. Like they're not human. So I'd
show it to a 7-year-old.
Yeah, I feel like it sort of skirts that line. It is interesting that you used to just be able to put boobs in a PG movie.
Yeah.
Because you can't do that anymore.
Did you have the
it's non-sexual though. I mean,
did you have the high school experience of watching Romeo and Juliet?
No.
The late 60s one? And
I mean, I know what you're talking about, but no, we didn't. Nobody ever tried to show us Franco Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet in high school.
Like I've had that conversation with multiple people because it's like, oh, okay, and the teacher runs over. But you're right. In this regard, it's not sexual. It doesn't deserve an R. I think I'm just looking at it.
Yeah, the MPAA doesn't, like, in 2021, I don't think the MPAA distinguishes. Nudity is nudity is nudity. You get a PG-13 or an R. I'm just saying, to me, it's not like there's a sex scene in this movie. It takes her top off. It's like, well, she's an alien who's just been born out of a pod. What would she be? She'd be born in a sundress? That doesn't really make a lot of sense.
No, it makes
and it's creepy.
Sense.
The way it plays out in the movie is not titillating. It's creepy.
No, it's very creepy. You know, back to interesting jobs. I also thought it was super. Took me a minute to realize Jeff Goldblum and not Nancy Cartwright. That's
Veronica Cartwright.
Veronica Cartwright. That's The Simpsons. Are married or a couple, and they run this bathhouse together. It took me a minute.
It's like a weird, like a spa, but like a very 70s spa.
And I'm like, what's going to happen here? This is an interesting, you know.
It's very, I obviously this is on purpose, and I'm curious as to, like, I'd love to quiz WD Richter, who wrote it, or Philip Kaufman, who directed. like it's there to be gross. Like that's a
Mhm.
gross setting. Like it's older, heavy-set men in these percolating, bubbling mud baths. There's one man who's reading a sci-fi novel in the mud bath, and the mud has caked over the bottom of the book. It looks like
So
it would not
messy.
even be possible to read because the bottom of the pages would be covered in mud. It's absolutely it's revolting.
Yeah.
It's there to be gross, but I'm not quite sure why he wanted it to be this gross setting for so much of the movie.
Yes. Now, like, that is the one scene where I don't think today, especially, but like, no one could help themselves probably to make a jump scare to that the scene where they're looking for the person
Yes.
the Jeff Goldblum that escaped, and I was waiting for some sort of
For
he's
the
in there or
right.
something.
It's not a
And
jump scare kind of movie.
no, it's not. But today, even in non-jump scare movies, that shit happens.
Well, yeah, well, I feel like there's that weird guy, and I mean, there's that scene there where he's talking to Veronica Cartwright about sci-fi. He's reading a sci-fi book that he's recommending to her, and I think that it's there. We're supposed to wonder. It's one
Mhm.
of those scenes where it's like everybody you meet, you would be thinking about, well, is this a real person or have they been taken over by a pod person? I feel like a modern movie would not be able to resist
No,
making that a creepy horror scene where we
no.
discover that he is a pod person and she's got to get away from him or something. And in this, you're just left with the ambiguity of, well, maybe he's just a weirdo. I'm sure this place is full of weirdos every day.
Whenever we do, yeah, definitely. When in the helping themselves or modern movie and weirdos, I always and I wasn't have time to do it this for this watch. I always like to watch all of the remakes or or whatever if
All
I
the
do a movie like this.
variations on it.
Yeah, and this one I haven't, but I'm definitely going back to watching them
Well, you
because
did catch there is a
oh
scene that
yep,
purposefully where Don Siegel is the cab driver who directed the original movie,
person
and
H
then yeah, and then Kevin McCarthy,
or
who starred in the original movie, runs into the car and is like,
I was
"They're already here."
I was gonna ask you, it was gonna be one of the last kind of questions here. Um, I feel like there's so much to talk about though. But do you subscribe to the theory that you think Kevin McCarthy is still running from the ending of his movie, and it's the same
It's
kind
been
of
all
there's a
it's been. No, I
yeah
don't think
no
the
I
timelines work out, and he would have to take time off to be R.J. Fletcher in UHF. So
don't.
that comes right in the middle, in between the two movies.
Oh my god, you're right.
Did you never put that together? I'm just going to take a brief detour to
Nope.
say a very underrated villain performance. Kevin McCarthy in UHF.
Yeah,
He's very funny in that movie. That's
talking
not a
about
character that's brought up a lot.
talking about earlier about comedies as kids. That was like one just threw on, and I probably haven't revisited in about like 15
Yeah.
years. So, oh,
Yeah.
that, yeah. So he
Can
took
I
time
call
off.
you Stanley? Stanley. You're fired! Yeah, that's him. The late great Kevin McCarthy, folks.
And this movie, we kind of jumped right in everything. Its cast is phenomenal.
Oh my God, we really haven't even mentioned Leonard Nimoy.
No, and that's who we were just going to bring up. Leonard Nimoy. I mentioned Jeff Goldblum a couple times early role. Very Goldblum-y still immediately. That's nice. But Leonard Nimoy,
Yeah.
I mean, he's height of Star Trek.
Yeah,
Height
this
of what I
is
understand.
78. So this was, I believe, Star Trek, the
Motion
show would
picture.
have been over.
Yeah, I think, but the movies had started. I think you have
Right.
Motion Picture comes out at this
Yeah.
time.
I mean,
And-
he's globally famous as Spock
Yes.
in 1978.
Yeah, and he has
Yeah,
been,
the next year, the year after this would be Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
okay.
So
And
this is between he was TV Spock. We have not yet launched the Star Trek Motion Picture franchise, but it's coming very soon. But everybody watching this movie would have been Spock.
That's Leonard Nimoy. That's
Right.
Spock. And in this movie, I mean, he was cast to play against type in a sci-fi movie, which is pretty funny, to be like more of the guy who is emotional or into his emotions and not Spock and just be the psychologist or whatever he was
Yeah,
supposed to be.
right. It was just
And
sort of like the villain role, and I mean, it's interesting that I think pulling the guy who was Spock, you sort of innately trust him. He's the voice of
yeah,
reason, and
and
you can't trust him in this movie.
see, I have no relation to any Spock or sci-fi, so, and I didn't know he was a villain. He does come off as a villain immediately.
Yeah, well,
Like-
right. I mean, I think that's the tension of casting Leonard Nimoy in this role is if you cast a guy, if you cast a more obvious movie villain, it becomes a little one note David
No.
Kibner, because he's so obviously there from the beginning to be, oh no, it's not. Relax. Calm down.
That's her husband, right?
No, David
no,
Kibner
David
is
Kibner,
Leonard
oh my
Nimoy.
God.
Jack Belichick is Goldblum.
Yes, David Kibner. I have the list up and I put it back and you said the name and I'm going, okay.
Well, and it's such a fascinating back and forth too, because obviously, right away, Jeff Goldblum is such a charismatic figure. As you said, he's already doing what we would now think of as being the Jeff Goldblum.
Mm-hmm.
Like he arrived fully formed with this character, and so immediately you're on his side, and he specifically hates Leonard Nimoy from the very beginning. So again, it's this thing of the movie doesn't let you. It doesn't play by the normal rules. It doesn't let you get your bearings. It doesn't say, here's your hero. Here's the people your hero likes. Here's the people your hero hates. Like normally a movie would do that in the first few scenes. So you're like, okay, I like this guy. Fuck that guy. Here's what we're doing. Let's go. And in this movie, it's like, here's the scenario. Here's all of the different players. And now we just kind of follow some of them and then others, and we never quite know who's playing who. And you mentioned the thing. I think it has a similar kind of vibe to that. Although Carpenter does eventually let us kind of know, okay, Kurt Russell's our guy. We're going to stick with him.
This movie has more.
This one never settles. We never get a Kurt Russell.
You don't settle. And this movie has more of a like an art house vibe to it in the way things are structured. With that, right? Like,
I mean, in the 70s, that was just movies, but today
that was just movies, and I'm just coming from 2021.
Right. Well, I mean, like it's a little. It's not quite formulaic in the way that in the way that Jungle Cruise would be this weekend, but in the 70s, this was not art house cinema at all. This was like a movie that came out, a hit.
Yeah.
Movie,
it was a hit. 3.5 million. I have it grossed 200, almost 225, not 200, almost 25 million. I mean, it was
in its day, it was well liked.
So I always read the IMDb trivia when I watch this stuff just to pull whatever. There was really only one like fun fact I found about the movie itself that wasn't just like big weird cameos this movie has. So this movie has like Robert Duvall is a guy in a swing in the background, right? It's one. Jerry Garcia is the guy, not the guy who plays the banjo, but he's the beat banjo. He's playing the banjo like audio, like things like that. And I think there's and then you mentioned the two cameos earlier. The only really like fun fact I found about of the filming of it was the ending. Only Donald Sutherland, the writer and the director, knew the ending of him being a pod person, and Veronica Cartwright's reaction is 100% genuine. She was told like, oh, you're just going to go run up and do this scene to Donald, and him, is...
And the rumor... And who knows how true this is? The rumor is that Kaufman hadn't even told the studio executive. He let it be a twist for the executives to see when they previewed the movie.
And he didn't want to shoot another. That's what I have right here. The script had an alternate ending because they wanted to slap a happy ending on there.
The original '50s movie has a more conventionally cheery ending, and Kaufman felt that it was a little.
Have you seen that?
The 50s one? Sure. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's great. It's really good. It's very much like, whenever you see the 50s version of the movie that we remake them and it's a bit like denser and more realistic and more layered, whereas the original, they always kind of, a lot of 50s sci-fi to me just evokes Twilight Zone. Like it feels like
Sure.
feature length Twilight Zone, but it's that approach. But very straight ahead. It is what it is, but it's really well done. And Kevin McCarthy, it's fantastic. And Don
No, I never
Siegel
watched
directs the hell out of it. Don Siegel went on to do Dirty Harry,
Mhm.
Charlie Varick, a lot of great Hell is for Heroes, a lot of great movies.
And then, I mean, that's like, and that's even like in the name itself, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That's not a, and I'm talking about, when I say modern, I mean like 1960 and up. Like that's not like a modern name for
Right. It's
a
the
piece
sort
of
of thing
horror.
like
It's like
you think of like Matinee. It's like the sort of
Yeah.
thing that would have played that kids would have been into in the 50s. It would have, like
And-
Them or whatever.
like if you had like, not now, but probably if you asked me like, oh, what's Invasion of the Body Snatchers come out, I'd probably like doodle out Mars Attacks instead, right?
Right.
Just based off the name. So I get why, like, I think there's a 90s remake or something like 1990 remake. And then
There was
there's
a
really,
TV movie, I think.
that's what I'm thinking of. And then there's
Yeah.
a really failed movie with like Nicole Kidman and James Bond,
Invasion.
Invasion.
But there's been a ton of riffs on the, like, if you want, like, the idea of an alien invasion where they replace humans
It's all there.
Yeah, like that's been redone many, many times.
It's all that. Hell, even well, not in place. There's even an episode of SpongeBob where where they parody the exact ending, like, and that's pretty recent. I looked it up today because I was curious. It's like, where has this been parodied? I'm like, that's a weird one, but
interesting thing about the Duvall. You mentioned the Duvall cameo.
Yeah,
I think Kaufman has later said that the significance of that is Duvall's the very first pod person that we see. So you're supposed to notice that he doesn't quite look right. I don't know if I ever picked that up. I
mean, Robert Duvall's never looked right. So
right, he always kind of looks a little weirdly after.
No, that's neat. It's like God, probably just because I was flipping through TikTok or whatever, but like who's in the Will Farrell's randomly in the background of, I think, like the Impractical Jokers movie, right? That's not a real movie. I mean, in the sense of like movie terms, but like,
I mean, listen, I think it came out as a.
It came out. That's not what I mean.
I'll give it to the Practical Jokers.
I love them, but it's saying like, Will Ferrell's sitting in the background. If you're paying attention to one of those scenes, it's one of those fun point, and that's Robert Duvall in this, right? I went back and rewound it after I read that. So he's the first pod person, and then we see it just kind of happened, and the fact that it comes down from plants is super interesting.
Yeah, it's right. Well, because it's not a conventional threat, and it does. The movie kind of goes to great pains to. It's not hostile. It's not a hostile invasion. This is just what these life forms do, and they even towards the end, when you start having conversations with pod people, they're explaining like. He's like, I hate you. And they're like, we don't hate you. We just like, look, you might like it. This is just what we do. We drift out of world. Like, it's an alien. They don't have our sense of self or morality. Like, they can't understand why we would not even, like, we wouldn't welcome this. And it makes it hard to, it's just like, it kind of puts you on your heels. Like, it's not a traditional sci-fi movie where you'd hate the alien menaces, like, Will Smith punching an alien in the face at Independence Day and say, welcome to Earth. Like, you can't do that because they're plants. Like, how can you hate a plant?
Well, speaking of Will Smith, I mean, in Men in Black 2, that also comes down by a plant.
Is she I guess she's like a sentient plant though.
Form.
But you could like she could be reasoned with. Like these are like they're just like they're alive, but they're like, look, this is happening. We don't have an emotion about it. It's just happening.
That's a great point, Locke, because the ending does, you get the type of like plot explanation or like reason explanation that I like to see in movies, where we're just throwing it over our head. We didn't have exposition dumps everywhere. Just at the end, like Leonard Nimoy is the person to deliver that, right? And you're like,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. It makes sense, and it makes it even more nerving. I think the ending 2 minutes of the audio of like the kids running around and saying like, I don't want to take a nap now. Like they're just taking over everything because it's more of an infection than not. And I think
Right.
that's where, like we were just earlier bringing up the modern day political comparisons of everything is like you could straight up compare it to anti-vax stuff. I mean, I think almost every
Sure.
person's probably, I'm sure you've had people in your life in the last, let's say, year, I know I have, where you do a double take, whether it's on their social media or in person, you go, wait, what did you just repeat?
Yeah, I mean,
You
I think
know,
it's so
like,
universal an idea that you could imagine people from either side looking at this movie and seeing the metaphor. Like, there's that scene where everybody they're trying to blend in with the pod people, and everybody is like walking out of their office in lockstep, and you can see that there's no talking, there's no chatter, it's not human. They're just leaving space and all heading in the same direction
cogs in the
because
machine.
they're like a hive mind now, and so you could see that as, like, imagine as an anti-vaxxer, you'd be like,
Yeah.
well, those are the sheep marching in lockstep following orders. That's
Mm.
not me, that's everybody else. But then you were just making it from the opposite perspective of, well, no, this
Oh.
is like looking at the people in your own life who have become susceptible to these conspiracy theories or QAnon, and like suddenly they're unrecognizable. So that's what's so potent about this as a metaphor, is that no matter what your specific perspective is, we've all had that feeling of, why don't all of these other people see this the way I do? I can see this so clearly. Why do all of these people see it so differently?
Well,
And it's just fundamental about being human.
well, get ready for this podcast to blow up, and then like Ben Shapiro to do this same podcast, but on the other side,
You
of the
could. I
same
mean,
conversation.
you absolutely could.
You're
It's
absolutely
one
right.
of those weird pieces of art that is real. I mean, obviously, I think Philip Kaufman, you could look up what side of the fence he's on in his
Mhm.
beliefs. But I think this movie, you could look at it from either perspective and say, this is speaking to my truth and to my observation about the world. And like, the
Mhm.
pod people are the ones who don't understand that Democrats are eating Christian babies. Like that, you could see that
Yeah,
happening, and that
what
because it's such a universal feeling of feeling that feeling of, what could be more modern than feeling alienated from the rest of humanity.
it's so nice. It's yes. I just leave you there with it because there's so many things in this movie where it's like, what's so unnerving is Leonard Nimoy, um, or not even Leonard, when they're trying to turn him, they're all trying to turn Donald and Elizabeth, and they're saying, no, you won't notice anything when you're gone. You'll have all your memories, you'll have everything, but you'll be better. I
Right.
don't say you'll be better, but paraphrasing here, and it's so unnerving because you're right. You pick that either side. Someone could say
Yeah.
that
I
to
mean, you're
you,
right.
and
That'd be like, get the vaccine and then everything will be great. It's bliss. And like
mhm.
that's not what I think, but you could read the movie that way.
I mean, it's like how I got you on this podcast today. It was just like, no, man, come on.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Brainwashing.
yeah, no, but all
Propaganda.
good. What anything else you really want to add to this discussion? I do feel like there's so many different lanes with this movie that you could go down. Anything we kind of missed today,
I
or
mean, no, I mean, I think we hit all the big beats. I think this is it's a great example of how, this movie's as old as me. I was born in 1978, and it's still, so relevant, and I think still has so much to say, and feels, vital in its way. Like I was just talking about uh Loki, and how the visual aesthetic of Loki, they borrowed so much from 70s kind of conspiracy
mm,
thrillers and paranoia thrillers, like especially in the TVA, where it was all that like beige and brown and black and all these really muted interiors with all these like deep earth tones. And it's like, that's so much like a lot of these movies, and like The Godfather, like all that
oh, they
very
all fit that
70s.
feeling.
interior sort of muted style. And so yeah, I mean that's what I would leave people with. It's like older movies can be really vital. This is 40 years old and it doesn't feel
Oh,
dated and it doesn't feel like super
not
old
it.
and like we're only watching it to, sound smart or whatever. It's just a fun movie.
Not at all. I completely agree. Any visiting good movies that are old that are just made well and written well, they will always hold up. Whether it's
Yeah, and I mean you can watch something from
1920,
like they're comedies from like the 30s and the 20s
yeah,
that still feel vital. Like I
um,
think people have this idea that movies reach a certain age and then they become artifacts and they're only they're interesting, but they're
mhm.
not movie. You don't watch them just for fun. If you want to watch something for fun, you watch Iron Man 3. And if you want to watch something that's enlightening, you watch, an old movie. But like old movies can just be fun. It
It,
doesn't have to be these kinds of divisions.
no, you're absolutely right, and I think this is falls in a category which I've been talking about on this podcast of it is a sci-fi thriller horror whatever, and it's an evening one, right? Like even if you are scared of things, we could put this on. I mean, it's 11 o'clock here. I could put this on 11 o'clock, watch it, and go to bed and completely not be afraid.
Yeah.
Compared to like, I'm not going to after this turn it off and go, yeah, let me watch The Exorcist, even whenever it is. Speaking of movies from the '70s, like that'll keep me up.
Right.
Just if it's just its essence, or The Omen, or
Yeah.
whatever
This
you
is
be, right?
right. It's a slightly different mode. It's like
This
unsettling. It's
it's
as
unsettling.
opposed to freaky. Like this isn't being stalked by Jason Voorhees in the
Mhm.
woods.
And if you got to, and this is just a new question I'm thinking of, if you got to recommend a pairing to this movie, what would your double feature be?
Oh, I would go for the other classic '70s Donald Sutherland horror film, Don't Look Now.
Great.
1973's Don't Look Now. Nicholas Rogue. Have you ever seen that one?
No, it'll be
I don't
next on
want
my
to. I don't want to
list.
give too much away. Okay.
No,
Donald
I'm.
Sutherland and Julie Christie star. They're a couple. They are grieving. Their daughter died not too
Mhm.
long ago. Uh, they are in Venice because Donald Sutherland has accepted he restores buildings and he's restoring a church in Venice. And then they begin to believe, or he begins to believe that or I think maybe both of them. I think Julie Christie, at some point, they both begin to see what they think is their daughter
Mm.
around Venice. So it's like, is it a ghost story? Are they just going crazy? And it's a descent into madness. You kind of don't
I
know.
gotta check it out.
I don't want to say anything. It's like a psychological thriller / horror movie, but it absolutely brilliant. A great showcase for Nicholas Rogue, who did a lot of great movies in this
Cool. I gotta
period.
check it out. I got enough blind spots in the '70s, and I got a much open spots in the '70s. Decade I love filmmaking. I just gotta watch
Yeah.
it. um.
Yeah, no, it's Don't Look Now is fantastic. It's on Criterion. It's one of
mm,
those movies that comes out with like deluxe Blu-rays now and again
Sure.
because Rogue has a lot of body
Right.
fans. And it's a very like it's a little artsy. It's a little
Mhm.
bit like a chronological. In fact, there's a sex scene in it where it's like jumping around in time. So you're watching them like at the beginning of the evening, and then having sex later.
Oh, that.
And Soderbergh riffs on it in Out of Sight. It's like explicitly
Okay.
what
Yeah,
Soderbergh
I
is
know.
lifting in that scene from Out of Sight, where he cuts from them at dinner to them later. It's
Yeah,
like he's doing
few
the
movies do
Nicholas
that.
Rogue from Don't Look Now. So
Yeah,
you'll
a few
recognize
movies
that
do
scene.
that. Okay, definitely. I would definitely check that out. Don't Look Now. Yeah, and then just Donald Sutherland. He's just always been a consistent. He's the consistent actor, right?
Yeah, so great, so great. Like it's cool to see these movies where he's our hero.
Mhm.
Because by the time I was seeing him in movies in the '90s, he played a lot of crazies or like Backdraft. I was just talking about today, where
I
Donald
saw your
Sutherland
tweet
is like
about Backdraft.
the nutty arsonist they go see in that one scene. And so yeah, in these movies, he's like the calm center. Whereas sort of later he got known for his more
Being
colorful character.
prestigious a little bit or colorful, and yeah, just
Well,
real
now
quick.
he's like the bad guy in Hunger Games.
Yeah, that's the last think that's the last notoriety he had in movies of popular.
Well, he was
popular
just Getty
movies.
in that Ryan Murphy series as well.
Oh, yeah, I didn't.
Trust.
Anyway, it's funny you brought up the Backdraft Twitter thing because it did get me thinking today. Oh man, how many movies do people like jokingly be like, "That's a classic now"? I think that's what you're applying to, and like get it wrong because Backdraft is a good movie.
Yeah, well, that's right. It was Scott Tobias, who I usually agree with a lot of his takes. But yeah, I was just surprised because I didn't think we thought of Backdraft as a bad movie.
Yeah.
I always remember people liking Backdraft. It's Ron Howard. Like,
but Backdraft falls in that category. And guys, welcome to the Backdraft podcast. But Backdraft falls in the category where I think I was going to say a little earlier, where I'd like to go through like movies like in the 70s, 80s, whatever, 90s, of movies that aren't forgotten but aren't talked about, right? There's so many of them where it's like
Backdraft, the two things that really keep it going. One, it was that universal attraction for so long. So even people who never saw the movie remember going to Universal and they light the warehouse around you on fire. And it was the Backdraft thing. But also those effects. I mean, I don't think to this day there's a movie with big like firefighter burning building scenes that are more like vivid and memorable and cooler than the ones in Backdraft. Like that was an early ILM movie. Like it's pretty kick-ass. So like there's that scene where they're running across the roof as it's collapsing and caving in with the fire. And anytime you've got famous actors like in a set that's like in flames, and like there was that HBO, I guess it was Warner Brothers, and it just ended up on HBO Max. Those who wish me dead or whatever with Angelina Jolie. It was Angelina Jolie's a firefighter and she's protecting this kid from these like assassins. This was a 2021 film. This was just
I know what you're talking about. I just didn't catch
it. And she's a firefighter, and they keep like there's a forest fire going on for the whole movie, and they keep promising that there's going to be like a big showcase scene.
Doesn't do it.
And then at the very end, they like outrun a fire, and you could very clearly see that it's mostly like green screen because it's expensive and hard. Like Angelina Jolie's like, I don't want to stand next to a fire.
I'm gonna singe my eyebrows.
Like you can't catch me on fire. But Ron Howard was like, hey, Scott Glenn, why don't you get in there and let them light you on fire? And it was the 90s, so Scott Glenn was like, all right. So that movie is cool. Like, there's a lot of crazy fire shit in that movie.
You just have my next, you just probably named my next Flyover State of Film pick. That's the type of movie.
I mean, like, listen, I don't want to overpromise. I don't want to overpromise in terms of the drama. It's kind of a cheesy movie. There's a central mystery that's not that hard to figure out. But a lot of fun performances, and the fire stuff is I don't see how you could argue the scenes where they're putting out these huge, crazy chemical fires aren't cool. Those are cool.
Definitely. Well, I like your insight on it.
They almost lit Kurt Russell and Billy Baldwin on fire. Come on.
I don't think Kurt Russell's never not been cool. So,
yeah, exactly.
All right. But back to the Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Fine.
No, I'm
kidding.
Okay. Very highly recommend. I know you do as well. I would assume. I did also order. You mentioned briefly about Don't Look Now, about the higher end Blu-rays. I know you had recently got the Shout Factory or Scream Factory. Don't Look Now. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, right?
I don't think I got it recently. I think I've had it for forever, and I just hadn't opened it.
I ordered it because I was watching it, and whenever I'm into something, I will order that Blu-ray. And I've been on a bit of a Scream Factory purchasing kick, especially now.
Yeah, I've got it. I've got it over there. I've got it over there somewhere.
So that should be coming soon. Anyway, I'm going to conclude here because it's never good to end a podcast, but just telling you can conclude here. Where can the people find you, Lon?
Find me on Twitter at LONS. That's the best way to keep up with whatever I'm doing. I'll share it on there. And wherever you find your podcast, Spotify, iTunes, we're on all of them. Check out Binge Boys. It's with me and Hal Rudnick. We talk about whatever we watched on streaming platforms over that past week.
Excellent. And thank you for coming on again. I've had a great time, and
My pleasure.
stay frightful, everyone. I'm still learning my sign off, so keep this in, Yusuf.
It's fine.
Welcome to Flyover State of Fear.